Rain hammered the windshield like restless fingers, blurring the world outside and slowing Oliver Hayes' thoughts into uneasy silence. It was almost midnight, and the road home was empty except for the rhythmic sweep of the wipers and the low hum of the engine. Oliver leaned back, exhausted from a charity event where he'd smiled more in 2 hours than he had all week. But here, alone in his car, his smile faded, replaced by a familiar emptiness he could never quite explain. Wealth had brought comfort and admiration, yet something inside him remained unfinished, unanswered. As he neared a quiet intersection, the headlights revealed a shape on the sidewalk, someone moving unevenly through the pouring rain. At first, Oliver assumed it was just another pedestrian trying to escape the storm. But something about the small figure made him slow down. The person was shielding something beneath a soaked coat, holding it close as though protecting treasure. Oliver squinted through the rain. Not something, two somethings. Babies. Tiny heads, tucked against a woman's chest. His heart lurched. He drove past, breath unsteady, telling himself not to get involved. This was a private moment, someone else's problem, a story he didn't belong in. But the image clung to him like wet clothes. A mother alone at night, carrying twins, soaked to the bone, eyes full of silent fear. His hands tightened around the wheel as guilt battled habit. In his mind he heard a voice, soft, honest, impossible to ignore. Turn back. Oliver exhaled sharply and made a U-turn. The decision felt sudden, but something deeper had already chosen it for him. He slowed beside her, rolled down the window and offered shelter. She hesitated, whispering thanks, voice trembling. When she stepped into the car, cradling the babies, Oliver saw their faces, so small, so fragile, so trusting. Something inside him shifted. Something he hadn't felt in years. And though he didn't know it yet, that single moment, on a rainy street, beneath the glow of street lamps, was the beginning of a truth that would reshape every part of his life. The warmth of the car's heater slowly eased the trembling in her shoulders, but her eyes still darted around, cautious and unsure. Oliver watched her through the mirror, noticing how she tucked the damp blanket around the babies, murmuring gentle words near their tiny ears. The twins, two perfect boys, stared back with sleepy blinks, unaware of how fragile their situation truly was. "I'm Oliver," he finally said, keeping his voice calm. She hesitated, then replied softly, "Sophie?" She didn't offer a last name and he didn't push. It felt unnecessary, almost out of place in that quiet moment. He offered his home, warmth, food, safety. But she looked stunned, as though the idea itself was too generous to trust. "Just for tonight," he added. "Until you feel steady again." Sophie's gaze flicked toward the babies, then toward the storm outside. The choice was written in her tired sigh. "Thank you," she whispered. Those words felt heavier than they sounded, as if they held the weight of months spent hoping someone, anyone, might care. As they reached the driveway, Sophie's breath caught. The mansion before her seemed unreal, glowing with soft golden lights and surrounded by gardens that whispered calm instead of judgment. She looked down at her worn shoes, almost embarrassed to step out. Oliver noticed. "You're safe here. That's all that matters," he said gently. Inside, a quiet room waited, fresh sheets, warm towels, gentle lighting. The moment Sophie walked in, she paused, overwhelmed, as though the softness of the bed alone could undo her strength. She laid the babies down, smoothing their blankets with trembling fingers. Oliver turned to leave, wanting to give her space, but something near her bag caught his eye, a small leather wallet, edges frayed, half visible beneath the blanket. For a second he wondered who she really was, where she came from, what pain had led her here. But as he watched Sophie lean over and kiss each tiny forehead, another question rose, louder, clearer, impossible to ignore. Why did helping her feel like the most important choice he had ever made? Morning sunlight spilled through the guest room curtains, warm and peaceful, a stark contrast to the stormy night before. Oliver stood at the doorway, uncertain whether to knock or quietly retreat. Sophie was already awake, cradling one twin while gently humming to soothe the other. The scene felt strangely familiar, as if he'd stepped into a memory he didn't know he owned. Their eyes met, and Sophie offered a shy smile, tired, worn, but genuine. "They slept better than usual," she whispered. Oliver nodded, relieved, though he wasn't sure why her comfort mattered so much. Downstairs, breakfast filled the kitchen with soft, inviting aromas. Sophie sat carefully at the table, posture small, hands folded as if afraid to disturb anything. "You must have questions," she said quietly, eyes focused on her tea. Oliver shook his head. "Only if you want to talk." She let out a breath, one that seemed to carry months of unspoken weight. "I've been moving from place to place," she began, voice breaking around the edges. Trying to keep the boys safe. Trying to find answers. Her gaze drifted away, and Oliver sensed a story waiting just beneath the surface. One filled with more than hardship. Something deeper. Something hidden. She reached for her worn bag on the chair beside her, pulling it closer. As she did, the old wallet slipped out and landed softly on the floor. Sophie froze. Oliver bent automatically to pick it up. The wallet felt surprisingly heavy, as if it held more than money or memories. It held meaning. Sophie's fingers tightened around it the moment he handed it back, like a reflex born of fear. "Some things in here are all I have left," she murmured, pressing it to her chest. Oliver nodded, respecting the boundary, though curiosity tugged at him like a quiet echo. But just as he opened his mouth to speak, one of the babies reached toward him, tiny hands stretching out with effortless trust. Oliver lifted the child with a hesitant smile, surprised by how natural it felt. And in that moment, as Sophie's eyes softened and the baby leaned against his shoulder, Oliver sensed something shifting, something invisible but certain. He had invited a stranger into his home, yet somehow, with every gentle detail of the morning, she felt less like a stranger and more like a missing piece he was supposed to find. As the day unfolded, Oliver felt an unfamiliar warmth filling rooms that once echoed with silence. Sophie stayed near the babies, feeding them, whispering to them, smiling at small things only mothers noticed. He found himself pausing in the hallway just to listen. Tiny laughs, soft lullabies, gentle footsteps. It was strange how quickly the air of his home had changed. For years he had lived surrounded by art and expensive furniture, yet nothing had ever made the house feel alive the way those two boys did. Still, curiosity kept tugging at him, urging him to understand Sophie's story. Not from suspicion, something else. Something like a gentle pull toward truth. Later that afternoon, while Sophie napped with the twins beside her, Oliver saw the worn wallet lying slightly open on the edge of the nightstand. He hesitated. His heart and mind battled in silence. He didn't want to invade her privacy, but something told him the answer she carried might change everything, not just for her but for him as well. Slowly, with careful fingers, he picked it up. Inside, tucked behind faded receipts and folded papers, was a photograph. Not of Sophie, not of the twins, of a man. A familiar man. Oliver's breath caught. The face in the picture belonged to his late father, James Hayes, younger and smiling in a way Oliver rarely remembered. The photo looked cherished, its edges worn from repeated handling. On the back, 2 words were written in delicate handwriting, "For Sophie." The shock rippled through Oliver's chest. How did she know his father? Why would she keep this picture so close? And why did she look nothing like the life his father lived? He placed the wallet back carefully, unable to shake the feeling that destiny had arranged this encounter. He stepped into the hallway and leaned against the wall, the weight of discovery grounding him. Every question multiplied. Was this coincidence or something larger, something meant to be uncovered? Just then, Sophie stirred and opened her eyes. She looked at him with a calm, quiet expression that seemed to hold 1,000 untold truths. Before he could speak, she whispered, "There are things I haven't told you yet." Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from the courage of finally being ready to reveal the story the photo had only begun to unlock. Sophie sat up slowly, brushing a hand over her hair as if gathering strength. The twins were asleep between them, tiny chests rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. Oliver waited in silence, sensing that whatever she was about to share mattered more than any question he could ask. She lifted her gaze, eyes steady but filled with something fragile. "I knew your father," she began softly. The words rushed through Oliver like wind, scattering thoughts in every direction. She continued, voice breaking in places. "He helped me years ago when I had nothing. Not money. Not safety. Not hope." Oliver's pulse hammered in his throat. His father, known publicly for brilliance and discipline, rarely offered emotional generosity. "He gave me a place to stay when I ran away from home," Sophie said. "I was young. Scared. I thought I had no one. But he treated me like someone worth protecting." Her hands trembled slightly as she traced circles on one baby's tiny arm. "He used to show me photos of you. He talked about you with pride. He said you were destined to change the world someday." Oliver had never heard his father speak those words. Their relationship had always been complicated, structured, distant, held together by business more than affection. The idea that his father had shared kindness with someone else, quietly, without recognition or reward, felt astonishing. He searched Sophie's face for more, unsure whether to feel grateful or confused. "Why didn't he ever mention you?" Oliver asked. Sophie let out a long, aching breath. He wanted to help, but he didn't want to interfere. I think he hoped I would build a new life. I kept the photo to remind me that someone once believed I could. The room filled with stillness. Oliver glanced at the photograph again in his mind, the smile, the familiarity, the unspoken history. Something deep inside him shifted, loosening a knot he hadn't known he carried. But there was still one question stitching the air between them. Before he could speak, Sophie gently placed her hand over his. Her voice dropped to a whisper filled with meaning. The twins, they aren't strangers to him. Her words hung suspended, glowing with possibility, and Oliver's heart raced with an answer he wasn't ready to believe. Oliver felt the room tilt slightly as though time itself had paused to listen. Sophie's fingers curled around his hand, grounding him in a moment that seemed too large for ordinary breath. Your father met the twins, she said quietly. It was only once, shortly before he passed. The words touched Oliver like sunlight through fog, warm, surprising, impossible to ignore. He blinked, heart pounding with hopeful disbelief. He knew about them? Sophie nodded. He held them. He smiled at them. He told me they would grow up strong, kind, and loved. Oliver swallowed hard, emotion tightening his throat. For years he had believed his father left behind nothing but business files, distant memories, and goals he could never measure up to. Yet here was something different, something tender, something human. He wanted you to meet them, Sophie continued. He wanted you to be part of their future. Tears glimmered in her eyes, but they did not fall. She held steady, her voice soft but certain. He believed you were the kind of man who could change their lives the way he once changed mine. Oliver stared at the twins, small hands curled, tiny legs tucked beneath blankets, and felt a warmth he hadn't known he was missing. They stirred, blinking awake, and in that quiet moment he saw reflection rather than coincidence. Their eyes, the delicate shape of their faces, something about them reached straight into his heart. They weren't just children he had helped. They were family. They were hope. They were his second chance. Sophie leaned closer, her words barely above a whisper. I never wanted to ask anything of you. But yesterday when you stopped in the rain, her voice trembled. I think your father led you to us. Oliver exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Everything suddenly made sense. The impossible timing, the instant connection, the photograph resting in her wallet like a guiding star. Gently he lifted both twins into his arms. The boys looked up at him, trusting, innocent, and full of tomorrow. Oliver smiled, a real smile, alive with purpose, and whispered, We're going to build a new life. Together. Sophie watched him, relief and gratitude softening her whole expression. The house no longer felt quiet or cold. It felt like a beginning. And as the three of them gathered around the babies, the rain outside finally stopped, as if the world itself understood that something broken had been made whole again.